This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in the change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity. Joining us today is Matt Poepsel. Matt is the VP of Partner Growth at Predictive Index, and he's often called the Godfather of Talent Optimization. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Tom and Adrian, thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's just begin with how you came to be. Let's look at origins, how you came to be the Godfather. Give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, for a long time, I've been working with organizations, trying to help them figure out how do we maximize two things. One is team cohesion, and the other is team performance. And so we didn't really have good language for helping clients understand how do we actually accomplish these things. So we created talent optimization as this discipline that I know we're going to talk a little bit more about today. Talent optimization is really equal parts business as well as people. And so I was really excited to be able to play a part in codifying that discipline and really bringing it to the world. And I thought, we've got this need to really call some attention to it. Becoming the Godfather was like, I just had this tremendous passion for it. And to me, talent optimization is an offer you just can't refuse.
So, Matt, talent optimization, can you define that for us? And why do leaders need to be caring about this?
Yeah, it's a leadership framework is how I like to think of talent optimization. When you think about it, at the beginning of any operating period, we ask our leaders, the CEO, an entire company, whatever it might be, to have a business strategy. And if you fast forward to the end of that operating period, let's say it's the end of a fiscal year, then there are certain business results that the business was able to perform and pursue and put up on the board, right? So oftentimes the results don't match the strategic intent. And so when you think, well, what happened? Well, the reality is there's this middle part that's all about the people part of business where something got skipped. Talent optimization, therefore, is how do we align our people strategy and our people practices with the business strategy so that we get that business outcome and result that we want. It comes down to those people practices, and if we get them right, then business is going to flow naturally through the system. But whenever we skip a step, whenever we endure friction or we don't have the techniques that we need, it is going to show up in that bottom line.
Matt, I heard a leader about 3 years ago, before I was involved in talent optimization, he asked a great talent op question, or he made a comment. He said, I would like to spend more time solving business problems and less time solving people problem. And it turns out that most business problems are people problems in disguise. So talk a little bit about the damage that's done when we don't align our people strategy and our business strategy.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Tom. I mean, the reality is that in my experience, things that even look like business problems, technical problems, maybe there's a process that's not working well, a system that got misconfigured, well, there's always people behind it. And so what I start to say is that anytime you go look in the business, you're going to find one of three problems, in my experience, that are indicators that you have a gap and that talent optimization could help. The first is missed targets. Anywhere you've got a dashboard on your business that's red or yellow when you wish it were green, there is a people contributing factor to that. Another is strategic risk. When you're a CEO and you're kept up at night, just thinking, worrying about something that you need to happen 12 months from now, 18 months from now, and you just don't know if your organization can pull it off, that's an indicator that you have a gap in talent optimization as well. And the last one's a people tax. And this one's the most insidious of all. I like to say HR's got Kleenex in their office for a reason. And it's because people get frustrated. They're frustrated by competing goals. They're frustrated by poor communication, poor decision-making, things that make my job harder. Somebody who doesn't understand me as a team leader, somebody who's not giving me a career path. What happens is it doesn't show up as directly as a red light on a dashboard, But think about the countless hours that are lost. Can you believe what they did over in marketing? I can't believe it either. All that stuff is a drain on the bottom line. So any of those three things, missed targets, strategy risk, people tax, those things happen if we don't take a talent optimization approach. They're all business problems, but they have a people-centric root.
Well, Adrian, when I first met you, what I liked the most is you take change leadership and you say you begin with the people. So ask away.
That's right. That's right. And so much of the work that I do with change management often centers around either operating models or system implementations. And there's giant teams who are figuring out how to make a system work, and no one looking at the people who are running that system, right? And so that's where I come in and stay focused on the people piece of it. And that is really only in place for a particular change or implementation. When I think about the root issues of an organization, and you broaden that scope to really look at this talent optimization, it makes me think of what HR and people leaders are focused on. They're seeing these issues, but not putting the attention to it because maybe they're not seeing it as getting back to their bottom line. So what would you say is, one of the major focus areas that are facing leaders right now as we think about people strategy aligning with business strategy?
Yeah, I think that one of the universals is all about awareness. Do we have an awareness of who we are naturally in terms of each of us are somewhat different? What is it that drives us? That lack of awareness really hurts. And awareness has to happen at three levels in my mind. The first is self-awareness. Do I really understand my strengths and my natural gaps as a leader? Second is peer awareness. Do I understand the person who's sitting across the Zoom from me? Do I understand what their needs are? Am I meeting those needs? And then the third is the level of team awareness. When you start thinking about, now we have this dynamic, complex group of people pursuing collective but slightly different aspects of the objectives. And if you wanted to, you could boil that up to awareness for a cultural sense. It gets a little bit more abstract, but awareness has to happen at all those levels. And then we have to make deliberate choices about our behaviors and how they're going to take place within that context. But that's a generalized sense. I think it would be unfair to not acknowledge that we're going through a very unique time in business history right now. There are specific forces at work that we have not experienced before. And in my conversations with executives and HR leaders at every level, they are preoccupied, rightfully so, with some of the challenges that this current unique environment we're in, have presented. And if you'd like, I could share some of that with you now. If you think.
Yeah, please show us a little bit of that.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to get us right into this because it's fascinating. Here's how I like to say it. There are four dark forces. And unfortunately, I'm using a little bit of theater here, but the reality is this is how it feels. When you're an executive or you're an HR leader and you see these four forces that I'm about to put up and share on the screen here, you know that this keeps you up at night. The first is hybrid work. Hybrid work is the most dangerous format of work that we've seen yet. The reason is because we were largely on premise in offices before the pandemic came. And our leaders got fairly passable at doing what they did to drive team performance and team welfare. Then we sent everybody home to be safe who could be sent home. And they adapted. And they got to middling levels of that performance and team cohesion again. But now, when we started to reopen offices and we started to welcome people back to work, something surprising happened. A lot of people said, no, thank you. A lot of top talent said, I like this flexibility. We've been super productive. I've had work-life balance that I've never had before, and that's important to me. When hybrid work happens, leaders are going to be shocked and challenged by how difficult and how different of a format it is. How do I lead and provide equity for my team when I've got 5 in the room and 5 on the Zoom? That is an entirely new dynamic that most organizations are not prepared for. They obsess over the technology infrastructure, but they fail to think about, Adrian, to your point, the social infrastructure, the culture infrastructure that's going to allow hybrid work to work. Transparency, trust, belonging, all these types of things that are absolutely going to disrupt the business result. The second is the labor shortage. There are millions of jobs unfilled, and the competition for top talent is fierce, really fierce. So when you think about having a very small number of the ideal candidate, how do you prepare yourself to pull out all the stops to win that top talent? I had a client the other day and I asked them, do you have a relocation package? And they said, yeah, we'll pay for people to move closer to headquarters. And I said, no, a relocation package to anywhere. Would you pay for a client to move them to Utah if they really like to hike? Would you pay for that candidate to do that? And they said, you know what? For the right candidate, we would. And I said, good, because you may have to. You have to do unusual things because we're in an unusual time. So the labor shortage is very real, and it creates strain on the organization, and it creates risk for the business result if we don't get those jobs filled, and it's harder than ever to do so. The next one is skills gaps. We are seeing new demands for skills related to digitization, collaboration, all types of different techniques that are needed by the existing employees on the payroll, but their ability, willingness, there's lots of factors are preventing them from developing the skills that are necessary. In many cases, I've talked to leaders who aren't even sure what skills are needed to pull up a strategy where they have gaps. And that's a big, big challenge. And then finally, the great resignation, perhaps the one that's getting the most attention right now, is all about watching some of your prized employees walk out the door. I've talked to some clients that are losing 20, 30, 40 employees a week because they were not good to their people during the pandemic, or the business shifted, the teams shifted, the role of the individual shifted. Now they're not a great fit for the work we're asking them to do, or they just want to change. They've been through some stuff, right? And they're like, you know what? I just need a fresh start. There's all kinds of different reasons that it's happening, but it's making the job of putting up those business results harder. These are the four forces that are keeping executives and HR leaders up at night, and it's really occupying a lot of their creative and innovative energy going into like, how are we going to make it through this? So of these, one thing I think we could talk a little bit more about is hybrid work, and I've got some examples I could show you in that one in particular with the time that we have today. Is that
yes,
all right?
please do.
Yeah, perfect. So in order to frame this up, let me share this with you. I call this the world of work. What we find is that when it comes to work to be done in an organization, it generally can be broken down into one of four categories. Starting at the top right is innovation and agility. You're talking about dealing with creative forces, dealing with the unknown, being very assertive and driving things and making things happen. As an organization matures, and like a lot of startups start out that way, then you move over to the top left around teamwork and employee experience. How do we create a social infrastructure for our employees? How do we start the beginning of culture? How do we get high levels of employee participation and loyalty? After a little bit of time that an organization adds those two types of work, they say, man, we're making a lot of mistakes. We need some grown-ups around here. And they start adding the bottom left, process and precision. Now we need quality, repeatability, efficiency. And then we say one last bit, we need to move a little bit back closer to the customer. We need to drive with results and data, and that's that results and discipline quadrant. So those four broad categories actually account for an astounding percentage of the work that we need done. It also accounts for the people who are naturally wired to do those types of work. Any person can be looked at on this type of a diagram, and they may show up in one quadrant or on a border between two, and they may be, plotted differently. And so what I want to show you in terms of hybrid work is to show you a team that's very special to me because it's my team. And here's what we look like. Here you can see that the scatter of the individuals, we've got people who are naturally good at any combination of those things. Myself, I'm MP, Matt Poepsel up there in the top right. I'm a natural innovation and agility person, right? And so we can go through and say, where are your superpowers for me and the rest of my team members? And you can see already that it was very diverse. But now when we bring in hybrid teams and that dangerous format I called it earlier, the reality is we can take a look at where people are working, their chosen format, and now add a new lens to this entire world of work. So what you're seeing here in blue, that's what we call studio. That's primarily on-site full-time, at least 3 days a week in the office. Blue people like myself are there. Green is fully remote. They almost never come into the office for various reasons. They're out in the, what we call field. And then the last one being flow is I'll come into the office when I need to. but I want to have the flexibility to be able to come in, and we call that flow. So it varies whether they're going to be in the office or not on a given day. Now, here's what's the important thing. This is really important. When an employee chooses their work format, they do so for personal reasons, not for personality reasons. Okay. What that means is that if you look at the bottom left, Kathy, CM down there, Kathy and I have worked together for years. Kathy is a more introverted person, a little bit more reserved, very typical of process and precision type people who are naturally good at that type of work. But notice that Kathy has chosen to be studio like me. Does that mean that she wants tremendous amounts of my FaceTime and me just show up unannounced and ask her about how the Patriots game went last night? No,
Probably not.
absolutely not. Right, Adrian? No way. Well, look at the dot, and right next to me, DL, that's Dottie Lamarck. She's worked with me for years too. Fully field. She is a highly extroverted person, but because she works fully field, does that mean that she wants me to leave her alone? I should just let her go? No. It means for me as a team leader, I need to go out of my way to really engage and find time to spend with Dottie and make sure she's included in all of the proceedings. So the personality lens, the behavioral lens, if you will, helps me understand things that the format alone doesn't, that the other types of considerations don't. So I say to leaders in an organization, if you can't pull up a chart like this and show me your team, how can you lead that team? How can you meet their needs and have your own needs met? In this, it was already complicated with different types of personalities. Now you bring in different types of formats. I don't know how you can do it without the data and the tools and the techniques of talent optimization to make sure that team cohesion stays high, team welfare, as well as team performance.
What fascinates me here is you often hear on strategy, people say, let's map it out. And they use sticky notes or agile or whatever they're using, and they map out the whole strategy. And often they never do it with the people.
Right.
And that really resonates when you talk about a people strategy. Can you give a quick example of how this will enable the team to have conversations to separate whether it's a lifestyle need, maybe kids at home, or it's about wiring? How do you bring this to have deeper and better conversations with your team?
Yeah, what we remind the team members is not so much let's have everybody explain why they chose the format they chose. We don't do that. What we do say is that every individual has to make their own choice about which work format is right for them at the time. And so what we do is we create this appreciation of differences and basically say, if as an example, you want to work in the office, you can have any number of different reasons. That doesn't mean that it's any better of an employee or less of an employee or anything like that. And as a leader, your job is to ensure that you can provide as much equity as possible across the different formats. If you start showing favoritism to the in group, as it's called sometimes, of people who come to the office and give them the best assignments and the promotions and all that, you're sending a very clear message to the out group, which is the field workers, which is that you should go look for a job somewhere else. And that's not an intentional message, but sometimes without foresight and thought and without being aware, that's exactly what can happen. So
there is a fear of that now. People are afraid. They don't want to necessarily come in, but they're afraid they'll lose out. And so I think it's important.
And when your employer forces you to make that sort of mental gymnastics and another recruiter calls on the other line to say, hey, we're looking for somebody, you might take that call because you're like, I can't make the right decision. I don't want to sit in 45 minutes of traffic and go in the office when half the people are going to be on Zoom anyway. But if I don't, I won't get promoted. You're going to put that on your people and still expect them to do great work and feel great about it? No, it's not going to happen. So again, an enlightened organization is going to say, look, our business performs on the back of our people. And so to do right by people means to do right by the business. What does that mean? And even if we can't do it all at once, like, how can we communicate and say, we're trying to fight our way through this. This is a fluid situation. We're going to try this out. We're going to introduce something new. We need more transparency. Like, be proactive and be conversant with the employee base about what you're doing, what you know, what you don't yet know. And that's sending a message to employees that your welfare is important to us just as much as job performance. We're in this together.
This is so eye-opening for me. And as I think about a client that I'm working with right now, they came to the decision that the way that they are approaching their hybrid workforce is to define by role, not by individual, whether that role is full-time, at a on-site location, full-time on-site versus opportunity to be hybrid versus could be full-time remote.
Right.
And they are not within that framing, they're not giving a choice to the individual worker because your role is assigned to one of those three.
Yeah.
And the flexibility that they are creating is if you are hybrid, you can choose how much you want to be in the office. And rather than saying it's 2 days a week, for example, it's 8 days a month, but we're not keeping track of that. So if you want to be in for 1 week every day, and then another 3 days random within that month, that's fine. But it makes me, as I see this with this lineup, when you're working through a model like that, where you've decided as an organization that you're defining this by role, is there a way to back into still, to me, that's not necessarily as upfront as they can be in terms of caring for the preference of the worker, right? Which is what this really gets at, this providing this opportunity to choose as an individual which option you want. Is there an opportunity to have, where they feel as an organization they need to have that structure defined, but still do more to support the individual?
Yeah, I feel like my message to an employer in that situation is, kudos to you for thinking about this. However, you won't have to worry about some of those people because they're not going to be working for you for much longer. Right.
Right.
The reality is when you take a look only about the work, it's just like Tom's example of a strategy that's only made up of sticky notes that are technical, no people in it. It's tempting to do that. It's tempting to say, look, we can't have everybody be remote. So we'll just look at the roles and figure out what the job is. The problem is that you can't see if you don't take the people part is that one lives with a college roommate and that one has to put her kids on the bus. And this one has a 50-minute commute. Like, this other one's happy to come in the office, no problem. Like, people have personal situations that are going to influence that decision much more so. The other thing is, even if you just look at the job, how many of these jobs are siloed and completely work not with the rest of the organization? So now all of a sudden, if you've got two different jobs that you looked at independently in a siloed fashion, this one's allowed to be hybrid, but this one's not, and they're on a Zoom call together because you have to do Zoom because some of them were hybrid. And the person sitting in the office, they're like, well, I'm the only one here. Like everybody else is remote, but I'm told because of my job, I have to be here. They don't have to be here and we're doing fine work. Eventually it's just going to break down. So I don't blame employers for trying to fight their way through this. And it's very hard as an employer to say, it's hard for me to trust. If you didn't do the work to build your culture and you didn't hire people to a certain standard, then you're going to pay that price, unfortunately, now. It's pay me now, pay me later. And so the reality is they're paying that price now. But I think that being a little bit more holistic in our approach of looking at what's the work to be done and who's doing the work, I think that employers eventually will settle on something that's more balanced. And right now they're just clumsily trying to figure out, like, how do we deal with this? Like, it's a really tough time. And that's why I present
policies. Yeah, one size fit all policies, and by role is the easiest way to do it. It just won't work.
Right. And if you think about the who's most susceptible to changing jobs, millennials and Gen Z, right? People who are earlier in their careers and who have known a life of nothing but choice, right? And when they are finding plentiful jobs, and you're going to be the employer that says, well, your job position is XYZ, and that means you have to be on site. And they're like, I can go on Indeed and find 10 other jobs that are my job that don't have that requirement. And whereas before you might have been competing with the local market here in Milwaukee, guess what? You're now competing with the entire nation, because I've got a lot of employers all over the place that say, we're remote anyway. So yeah, you want to work remote, go ahead. So the entire candidate pool changed too. And I think employers aren't doing the math on that fast enough in every situation.
Well, I love the combination. You're building objectivity into subjectivity, not just removing subjectivity.
Yes, that's a great way to put it, Tom. That's because in either approach, if you go full subjective, then it's total guesswork and folly. If you go complete objective, then it's a reductionist way of looking at business that's artificial and it causes other problems. So we need both, to your point. That was very well said.
Yeah. Well, Adrian, any other questions? I could talk about this all day, but we already have a couple of promises before I let you ask that question, Adrian, which is that you will notice on that band that Matt just showed that there were some purple bands. We haven't really talked about how to align the work with the people. So that's going to be part of our series, but we don't have time to dive into it. Anything else, Adrian, that you have now?
No, I was going to lead and tease with the next bit as well to ask Matt. So how easy is it to get your people plotted on that world of work? I know the answer, but share it for everyone else.
One of the things I love the most is if I ask my people to do something like to fill out a survey or something like that. This one is incredibly brief, 6 minutes or less per person. And for that type of investment, to be able to see them in lights and to help share with one another, that's not a tool that I just take and I say, haha, I've got all the data, I put it in my pocket. We all look at that. We all have that on our walls and our whiteboards and all that kind of stuff, because we need to know one another. So it helps demystify this work that we do together. So that is a very transparent way of saying, here's who we are. Let's be proud of this. Let's celebrate our differences. Absolutely every one of them, after they've made that investment to see where they're plotted, we talk vigorously about what it means and how to have needs met. And if we ever, create a little bit of that people tax for ourselves, we're like, hold on, time out, Matt. You know how you're this idea guy who never wants to shut up and do grown-up work? Yeah, that's kind of showing up right now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, thanks for saying so. Yeah, we can do that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Matt.
My pleasure, Tom and Adrian. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
And for our leadership community, thank you so much. And we look forward to continuing to dig deeper into this topic. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.